Welcome into the Women's Basketball Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things women's college basketball, WNBA, and oh so much more. No cap, as the kids like to say, since I, if you're watching this on YouTube, have a cap on. Mitchell Northam has a cap on. Mia O'Brien, Mitchell Northam, excited to bring you the latest and greatest in the wide world of women's basketball, especially for those of you who may be tuning in now that the National Football League has come to a close with its 2024 season, as we were just talking about off the air, though, Mitch. We know the NFL never sleeps, but we also know for so many of you, as the clock and the calendar now flip towards March, perhaps you're a little more inclined to catch up on your favorite college basketball outfit on both the men's and the women's side. That's what we're here to do, provide you all of your updates, all of our insight and analysis in this crazy world of basketball. How are you on this third week? I believe it's the third week of February, sir.
I'm good. Just got back from a wedding. My sister-in-law got married. That was a lot of fun. And yesterday was kind of a recovery day, and today's the back at work day. And tomorrow I start my new gig at SB Nation, so that'll be fun.
I was going to say, you told us a little bit last week. Tell us more about this new gig and the exciting stuff you're going to be writing and providing all the content regarding.
Yeah, so I'm going to be covering women's college sports. Basketball will be the focus, so we're right in the thick of it, jumping in here now. But in the spring I might dabble in some softball. Next fall, maybe a little volleyball. But yeah, it'll be fun. I used to manage the Service Academy's blog at SB Nation, so kind of going, returning there a little bit. So it'll be fun. I'm excited to get to work and to tell some kind of, do some feature reporting in women's college basketball and do some other fun stuff. So I'll be traveling all during March Madness, so that'll be a lot of fun too.
And as you noted on your farewell/announcement tweet on X, you noted that you may not be in as many places, but perhaps a more consistent one-stop shop to find Mitch besides the Women's Basketball Podcast.
Yes, I'll be doing the Women's Basketball Podcast. I'll be doing digital stuff at WUNC still, and then writing at SB Nation. So probably won't see me with the Next or with USA Today's For the Win or some of those other places anytime soon, but I'll be writing a ton at SB Nation. So folks can always check me out there.
And of course, you can check him out each and every week here on the Women's Basketball Podcast, where he just went 3-0, folks, in making money with Mitch. We'll have a new slate of picks for you for this upcoming week of action. Also of note, Mitch broke some news on the pod last week regarding a Charlotte WNBA franchise. Could he have more intel, a more WNBA expansion? We'll get to all that here in just a little second. But as we do each and every week, Mitch, let's begin with our Her of the Week. I don't think we've honored this individual before. If we did, it was a couple months ago, but this is our first ever viewer submitted Her of the Week. Shout out to my good friend, John Bonenkamp out in Iowa, formerly of the Burlington Hawkeye, now does a little bit of freelance in both Iowa and Illinois. He has submitted, and we have co-honored Reagan McCowan of Western Illinois as this week's Her of the Week. She had 34 points in Saturday's overtime win over Morehead State. She is tied for 9th nationally in scoring, averaging 21.7 points a contest, is 4th in scoring among sophomores. Hannah Hidalgo, Juju Watkins, and Iowa State's Audi Crooks are the only players ahead of her. She has already reached the 1,000 career point mark in just her sophomore season with the Leatherneck. Shout out to Reagan McCowan, this week's Her of the Week.
Yeah, looking at her numbers and stuff, she's also 13th nationally in free throws made, so gets the line a lot. Western Illinois this season, shout out to them. Reagan McCowan sounds like she's a baller, and right up there in the top 10 and scoring nationally with the likes of, like you mentioned, Audi Crooks, Mikayla Blakes, Juju Watkins, Grace Larkins, Hannah Hidalgo, and Ty Latson. Certified baller. Western Illinois, not sure if they're going to make the NCAA tournament this year, but we'll see if they play in the postseason. We'll keep our eyes on Reagan for sure.
Hey, now, we love our mid-majors. We love the Summit League. We love to give the pride of the Summit League, SDSU, a lot of love. So we'll give the Western Illinois, wow, that's hard. did I butcher it again? Leathernecks. I wanted to say rubbernecks. I'm going to blame that on just coming off of a vacation and may or may not have been attacked by a rubberneck. And by a rubberneck, I mean a pelican during my time in the Keys. Thank you to John, though, for the submission. Thank you to Reagan McCowan for being an amazing ambassador of women's basketball. Let's get to this week's starting five. Yes, we have a new number one team in the country. Notre Dame is number one in this week's AP poll. Mitch and I are recording this on Monday, February 17th. Notre Dame just wrapped up a victory over Duke. They had a 2-point lead at half. Things looking a little dicey for the newly cemented number one team in the land. They pull away an 11-1 start to the third quarter. But we're not going to start with Notre Dame. Something tells me we're going to circle back to Notre Dame at the end of this week's starting five because, Mitch, I want to start with the curious case of South Carolina. This stat is just so stupid to me. And it's stupid in like the best way. It's just like very hard for my brain to understand. In case you missed it, folks, South Carolina fell to UConn, got boat race, as a matter of fact, by UConn on Sunday. South Carolina's largest home loss since December of 2008. Shout out ESPN for that stat. The final score, UConn 87, South Carolina 58, the Huskies' first top five road win since December of 2018. Here's the dumb stat. For the first time since March 3rd, 2019, both South Carolina and LSU lost on the same day. That's why we have to start with the SEC, not only because it's the best conference in all of women's college basketball, but Mitch, you and I were sitting here on this podcast talking about South Carolina as potentially, once again, the front runner to win the national title just 2 weeks ago. What the heck has happened in the last 14 days?
Yeah, I think it's more of what we talked about last week after their loss to Texas, where this South Carolina team to me really lacks a leader. I don't know, bus driver, just person who can lead them in kind of these situations, not only the tight games, but to make sure they don't suffer losses like this at home. South Carolina doesn't lose at home, really. They haven't lost at home. This was their first home loss since 2020 when NC State went down there and squeaked out a win with a really good team. My takeaway from the South Carolina side of this game was like, there seemed to be early on, really in that second quarter when UConn got ahead, and they outscored them 24-9 in that quarter. Just a lack of effort, a lack of execution, a lack of want to. We've seen the South Carolina team at their very best. They beat LSU. They have a bunch of super impressive wins on their resume this season. Beat Duke, beat TCU, beat Texas earlier this season. And, it's a team with a whole lot of talent. And I don't really know what the solution is. Dawn Staley said after the game that they weren't going to make wholesale changes, to the game plan kind of moving forward or in terms of minutes or whatever. And I kind of agree with her. At this point in the season, like it is late February, like you really don't have time to like make crazy adjustments like that, but you got to do something if you want to at least go back to the Final Four. To me right now, like that team, like if they go into March Madness playing that way, they're in for a lot of trouble. And if they go into the SEC tournament playing like that, they're really in a lot of trouble. They're going to have to go through Texas and Tennessee and, Texas and LSU are your teams at the top of the SEC kind of competing with South Carolina right now. But we've seen that Tennessee and Vanderbilt can give it to anybody. It's a super deep league, and I think South Carolina now, like I mentioned last week, it came out in the top 16 reveal Sunday morning that they were the number 2 overall seed. I looked at Charlie Cream's bracketology at ESPN today after the loss to UConn and after all the other results yesterday, and South Carolina is now the 4th number 1 seed. So, right now they're projected, assuming they advance to the Sweet 16, to go out to Spokane, Washington instead of Birmingham, Alabama. That's what you're risking right now if you're South Carolina. Do you want to go to the northwest of the country in the Sweet 16 and Elite 8, or would you rather stay in the cozy confines of the Southeastern Conference? So that's what they're playing for right now, and they got some things to figure out.
Interesting to still see them in Charlie Cream's bracketology as a number 1 seed, given in the AP poll, they did fall to number 6 in the rankings behind the likes of course, the aforementioned Notre Dame Fighting Irish, Texas, UCLA, USC, and the Connecticut Huskies. What I also find interesting, Mitch, is that Paige Beckers had her second worst shooting game of the season, and UConn still dismantled South Carolina. Interestingly enough, the storyline, and from all accounts, because Holly Rowe, Rebecca Lobo, and Ryan Rocco said it multiple times, Gino Auriemma made it very known that the only way, it sounded like, the only way he believed there was a path to victory for his Huskies team, a team that we criticized on this very podcast last week, because where would the scoring come from? As much as, yes, the bus driver undoubtedly is Paige Beckers, when she can't step up and be at her best and maybe doesn't have that attack mentality that Gino hopes to get out of her each and every night, who steps in? Does it have to be a true freshman in Sarah Strong? He said that they needed to hit threes, and they did hit threes. Now, my question for you is, how sustainable is this for UConn moving forward?
That's a good question. I mean, I think AZ Fudd playing 35 minutes in this game against this type of an opponent signals to me that it might be sustainable. And it's a really, I think a lot of stuff coming out of this game is the worries for South Carolina, but you have to give UConn credit too. I mean, they kind of beat South Carolina at their own game. Like when we talk about South Carolina this year, years past, I mean, rebounding and the inside presence and defense is the number one thing. UConn out rebounds them 48-29. UConn makes 13 3-pointers while holding South Carolina to just 3. I mean, really just outmuscled and outplayed them and outworked them in every way. And yeah, for you to win a game of this magnitude by nearly 30 points and Paige Beckers to only score 12, that's a really good sign for UConn that you can beat this caliber of an opponent on the road when Paige is not having her best scoring performance. So, huge game from AZ Fudd, 28 points. Huge game from Sarah Strong with the double-double and 4 assists. But then you have these other players like Ashlyn Shade and Jana El-Jaffe and Caitlin Chen all chipping in. And so that's a really good sign for me. That was my worry about UConn, is like, how far can just Paige and Sarah Strong take you? Now when you throw AZ into the mix and you have all these other complementary players playing at their best, which is what we saw yesterday, that's a good sign.
That was far from the only upset, though, on Sunday. As we move along in this week's starting 5, Mitch, you were on site for another upset, although maybe it wasn't an upset because I'm making money with Mitch. You picked the Tar Heels to upset NC State in a battle of the triangle.
Yeah, it was kind of wild. Last week when I did my picks, the line was North Carolina plus 1.5. By the time the game started, North Carolina was favored by 2.5, despite being ranked 2 spots lower than NC State at that time. But the Tar Heels were the home team.
And they won by
1 point.
I got to tell you, I told Kevin, my boyfriend, I told him as soon as I saw the score, I went, my God, those dudes out in the desert, they always know. Like, this is absurd.
They're very good at what they do. But that goes to the get in on the line when you can. Get in on the early line if you think it's going to go one way. So so that was awesome for me. For the Tar Heels, I was just blown away by their ability to win this game and play so well defensively without Alyssa Utsby for basically the entire game. She starts and she plays 2.5 minutes, and then she checks out and jogs off the court, and we never see her again. It's been reported at some other places that she's dealing with kind of a lower body thing. I don't know. So we don't know the status of Alyssa Utsby going forward, but she has been, really even more so than Deja Kelly in years past. Alyssa Utsby has been the identity of this Carolina team in terms of what Courtney Banghart wants to do with him, which is just absolutely outwork people on the defensive end, get rebounds, really hustle, get after it, and then, knock down shots when you need to. And she's kind of been an eraser for them in terms of like a tweener who can guard 1 through 5 and who is their leading rebounder and who also is their leading scorer. And has the ability to block shots. I mean, it's kind of wild, considering all the great players to come through Carolina. When you talk about Charlotte Smith and Ivory Latta and just so many great players. Alyssa Utsby is the only player in that program's history to have a triple-double, which I think kind of speaks to how important she is. So to beat NC State, really, really hot offensive team, can load it up with three-pointers. To beat them at home, I thought was super impressive. They held NC State to their lowest three-point shooting percentage of the season, just 20%. And Renaya Kelly, as we talked about back in November, we didn't really know who the bus driver for the Tar Heels was. I think it's Renaya Kelly. She comes out 23 points, 5 of 9 from three-point land. Really just a dog and really getting after it. She's also in on the final really key defensive play where Courtney Banghart said, I'm not going to lose on a Isaiah James lefty layup again. They drive Isaiah into the corner. She gets double teamed, game over. So really impressed by the Tar Heels, and they're in the top 10 this week, and deservedly so. And we'll see if they can kind of hang on to momentum. NC State, I still think really highly of them, that they're a good team. They missed 8 free throws in a game that they lost by 1 point. I'm sure they're going to kick themselves about that. If they get one more three-pointer to go down, this is a different game. They have a really tough road ahead of them, though. They're going to play another ranked team in Georgia Tech on Thursday on the road in Atlanta. And then on Sunday, they're going to host Notre Dame with ESPN's College Game Day in Reynolds Coliseum. And that game is going to be lit, and I can't wait to go. So that's where we're at with the Tar Heels and the Wolfpack.
And I will defer to you, since you were embedded with this North Carolina team all of last year, for those of our listeners who may be unfamiliar. And so if you believe this is a Carolina team that is deserving of a top 10 ranking, then by all means, Mitch, it is 1000% accurate. And I think for the Heels fans in the Triangle listening through OG Triangle Media right now, perhaps maybe, pivot your attention to women's basketball team away from whatever is going over there with Hubert and company. Yeah.
Yes. Things are much more enjoyable in Carmichael Arena right now than they are at the Dean Smith Center. 6,300 fans yesterday. I mean, it was packed in Carmichael. It was a really awesome atmosphere. And, Wes Moore said it yesterday too, NC State's coach. He said this is the best defensive team Courtney's had since she's been at Carolina since 2019. So defense has the ability to take you a long way in the NCAA tournament. So we'll see kind of what happens for the Tar Heels, once we get into March. But I think that they're about to reach an important milestone that Courtney Banghart has long wanted there, which is to host NCAA tournament games in the first round. I think they're a lock at this point to be a top 16 seed.
Let's keep it moving with another upset. This one actually came as I was arriving in the Keys, and I didn't know what day or time of day that it was. Final score from the West Coast: USC 71, UCLA 60. We have no more unbeatens in men's or women's college basketball. Yes, it took until February the 13th for the Bruins to finally lose a game. Juju Watkins becoming the first player with 35 points, 5 blocks, 5 assists in a game in the last 20 seasons. She made 6 threes, 11 boards, 8 blocks against the undefeated number 1 team in the country. We sat here on this very podcast 1 week ago, Mitch, and we said, it's not that Juju isn't potentially the national player of the year. It's not that, as a true sophomore, mind you, she might be or might not be the best player in all of women's college basketball. But unfortunately, because the unrealistic expectations of she was just going to immediately ascend to the mantle of Caitlin Clark, pick up the baton and run with it, were unfair. But here we are now, less than a week after we recorded last week's podcast, and you see that stat line and you say,
great players play well in big games. And Juju Watkins, I feel like every time we see her in a marquee matchup, I guess you could set the Notre Dame game aside this year, but for the most part, she delivers. And this was certainly a big game. This is a rivalry game. You're trying to hand your rival their first loss of the season. And she puts up just an insane stat line: 38 points, 11 rebounds, 8 blocks, 5 assists. Really astounding. But we saw this from her when they played against UConn. She played really, really well in that game, 25, 6 and 5. So that was something I think that was impressive to me, just her ability to turn it on and basically say, in a game with Lauren Betts in it, who is another contender for the National Player of the Year, to just basically say, no, I'm the best player on the floor today. And she certainly showed it. I know we've had like some worries about sort of the potential of this USC team because it's like, we needed some more consistency of, I think, Juju's supporting cast. I think Kiki Ariafen played really well in this game, 13 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists. And I think more and more lately, she and Talia Van Alhoffen and Rhea Marshall and some of these other players have really stepped up. Kiki really stepped up in their win over Ohio State recently and in that win over Washington. So I think we're starting to see, this past week as a whole, UConn to South Carolina to Texas LSU to, this game between UCLA and USC, I think it really just speaks to the parity that like we have in the sport now. It's not a sport anymore where like only 4 teams can win the national title. I think you really there might be like 10 teams where like if the bracket breaks the right way, like they can win the national title. And I think USC and UConn are firmly in that mix and proved it this week with these big wins.
Hold that thought because we're going to circle back to who your national champion pick is on February, the week of the 17th, Mitch, because I did initially write for the final 5th note in our starting 5. I wanted to ask you, what is the Big Ten? And then I realized, to your point, it's not just the Big Ten that's so wide open this year. It is the entire field of women's college basketball. So we'll circle back to that here in just a second. But first, you have noted on our rundown at number 4, Cleveland's ? I am assuming this is about a WNBA franchise?
Yeah, so it was reported yesterday. This is from the Sports Business Journal. Tom Friend.
Hello, Tom Friend.
Says that the WNBA is preparing to award Cleveland its 16th franchise. Multiple sources have told SBJ with an approximate bid worth a league record $250 million. So that is a whole lot of cash. And a lot of people have ran with this as fact, like this, is going to happen, that Cleveland is going to be the 16th team, which follows in the footsteps of, Golden State, Portland, and Toronto to bring us to 16. And yeah, I guess I was just a little bit surprised by this, just considering like all the bids out there that we knew about. I did not believe it was going to be Charlotte. I just think Charlotte got a little bit too late in the game and maybe doesn't have as many big names attached to their bid as that they wanted to. I thought Nashville was going to be a front runner just because the WNBA doesn't have as strong of a foothold in the Southeast. Nashville is a growing city. Nashville is a city that's been proven to support women's sports. It has the, connection with Knoxville, just to jump and a skip over. The names attached to that bid, Peyton Manning, Candace Parker, they came out with a color scheme and a name and, we're going to play here and all the stuff. So I was just a little surprised that it was Cleveland over Nashville, which I think leads me to think 2 things. One, I think the WNBA really values, I guess, the NBA ownership connection, or maybe just more importantly, the deep pockets that a NBA owner has to have, somebody like Dan Gilbert, who's worth billions and billions of dollars. And number 2, that this was settled sort of so quickly. I mean, the bid window just closed on January 30th. I think we're going to get to 18 teams. I think sooner rather than later.
That was going to be my question for you. Like, this may be team number 16, but does this signal that there will be 18?
I think so. I think maybe not by 2028, but maybe by 29 or 2030. The CBA is about to change. I wonder, if that ties into it somehow. But yeah, I just feel like Nashville had a super strong bid, and there's other cities out there with strong bids too. Just when you talk about the names attached to them and the plans that they might have for the team, Kansas City, Denver, Houston, there's other teams like Cleveland and Charlotte who want to bring back folded or defunct franchises. I think for the Houston Comets to come back would be awesome. I know Philly has talked about wanting a team for a long time. So yeah, I think it's, I think if the WNBA sort of keeps riding this wave that we saw, really swing upwards last season and has continued through Unrivaled and the Olympics, I think we're going to get to 18 teams sooner rather than later. Yeah.
And of course, like you noted, a $250 million reported bid. I'm curious if that had anything to deal with if this is indeed team number 16 in the W, because ultimately, I think your point about the NBA connection, I think that is well founded. And I know that's a conversation we have here in my house, I feel like once a week, about the idea of the Las Vegas Aces being one of the more successful WNBA franchises in the last 5 years. They have the backing of an NFL team and an NFL owner and an NFL minority ownership group.
Right.
And that's why they can be that outlier, and they can kind of be one of one, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. And I mean, the other super successful franchise has been the Liberty, and they have owners who are kind of, not ready,
or
not
the
scared.
Sun, or the Sun
Right.
too.
Yeah. Not scared to rock the boat in terms of, facilities and competition. And no, actually we should be using charter flights and that sort of thing. So yeah, I if you ask me to bet on it, we're not to making money with Mitch yet, but will the WNBA have 18 teams by 2030? I would say yeah.
We are almost to making money with Mitch, but to set the table for that and Chef's Table, we do need to wrap this week's starting five with what I alluded to just a short while ago. As of February 17th, when we are recording this podcast, Mitch, who is your pick to win the national championship in women's college basketball?
I felt this way for basically the past 2 months. I think it's Notre Dame.
Dang it, so do I.
I was voting Notre Dame number one in my poll when UCLA was still undefeated. And I started doing that after seeing them in person for the first time when they beat North Carolina. And I just, we've kind of made a joke about it before on this podcast, but it's true. The only two losses that they've had this season were not in the continental United States. And they were in November. And if you go back and look at those games, Notre Dame is not at full strength in those games. They don't have Maddie Westbeld, and they didn't have Lisa Carlin either. And so I start with the fact that they have probably, I think undoubtedly the best trio of guards when you talk about not just Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo, but also Sonia Citron, who would be the best player on almost any other team in the country. Just a super talented guard, is going to be a first-round WNBA draft pick. So you start with those three, and so you have this super talented trio in your backcourt. And then you look to the front court, and like for the first time, it feels like in a while, at least in E.L. Ivy's tenure, Notre Dame is fully healthy. And they had this depth in the front court that I think is helpful, and I think unmatched, certainly in the ACC. When you just talk about the skill and types of bigs that they have, you have Leah King, who was an all-ACC player last year at Pitt. You have Maddie Westbeld, who's been a veteran on this Notre Dame team. Then you bring in Lisa Carlin from the Big East, and she's lighting it up this season. And then you have, I think, one of the better but more underrated freshman bigs in the country in Kate Koval. So you can go four deep, down in the post, and then you have maybe the best three guards in the country all on your roster. It's for me, it's Notre Dame, and I just, even more so after tonight, after they pulled away from Duke with that run to start the second half. I don't think they're going to lose an ACC game, and I think they're going to run through Greensboro and take the ACC tournament title. And I think I'm going to see them in Tampa in April. So.
And in a weekend, I should say, in which Brianna Turner was signed by the Indiana Fever. And I was reminded of the last time the Fighting Irish won the national title in 2018. And that was with a team that essentially had 6 healthy players at different junctures of that season. The point that you just made, Mitch, about having 4 healthy players in the post, that is a luxury compared to what Irish teams not only had in that national title season, but also as recently as a year ago. And the fact that Niele Ivey has been able to load up this roster, especially in the front court, they will be able to compete with the Texases of the world, who, as we alluded to last week, perhaps one of the more underrated front courts. And I know a team that so many at ESPN and some of the other national networks in their weekly write-ups wrote as the hottest team in the country right now. But for me, I agree with you. Notre Dame has been the most consistent team from start to finish. outside of the Cayman Islands, but no games in the NCAA tournament are going to be played, as far as I know, in the Cayman Islands. So we're in the clear. Everything is all hunky dory.
As far south as Tampa. And yeah, that's the other thing about Notre Dame is like, when you look at who they've beaten, they beat Texas by 10. They beat UConn by 11. They beat USC by 13 in USC's house. And now they're blitzing through the ACC. They just beat Duke. They've beaten Louisville. They've beaten Georgia Tech. They've beaten North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Their margin of victories this season, Notre Dame's smallest margin of victory was a 9-point win over Clemson, kind of surprisingly. So I just every week, like, I just think Notre Dame is the best team. And it's kind of interesting because my first Final Four that I covered was 2019 in Tampa. And that was the final where Baylor beat Notre Dame. Chloe Jackson hit a great shot. And then Enrique, like, inexplicably missed key free throws at the end of the game. That was the end of that Notre Dame dynasty. And a year later, Muffet McGraw loses to Pitt in the ACC tournament, and then retires when the pandemic hits. And Niele Ivey comes in, and now I think she's got the best team. So it's been kind of a wild, 6-year ride for the Irish.
Shout out Muffet. Does a great job at the ACC network. I do enjoy watching her second act on TV.
Yeah, she's been good on TV.
Shout out to Muffet. Let's keep it moving. This week's Chef's Table, the 3 games you need to watch this week, beginning with this week's appetizer. Mitch?
Yeah, this is Wednesday night, 9:30 p.m. Eastern on The Cock. That's Peacock, streaming service from NBC. Michigan State, number 22 in this week's poll, at number 4 USC. I just wanted to highlight this one because, Michigan State was messing around and thinking about upsetting UCLA there for a second. Lauren Betts missed that game. It sounds like with a bit of a toe injury. I don't know how serious that is. Hopefully she's not out long, but I think Michigan State is one of the better teams in the Big Ten this season. I feel like in November we were talking about the Big Ten as like one of the best conferences, and now it kind of feels like they have these really, 2 heavy hitters at the top, and then, who
both happen to play in the state of California, mind you.
Right. And then there's Ohio State, but I don't really believe in them yet. And then you have this mix of like Michigan State, Maryland, Iowa, playing sometimes really great and sometimes really not great and inconsistent basketball. So we start off in Big Ten country on Wednesday night.
Yeah, Michigan State falling 75-69 nice Sunday afternoon to UCLA, who is, of course, no longer the number 1 team in the land, but still in the top 5. Let's keep moving with this week's entree. Oh, baby, we're headed to the Big 12. Don't say we don't love you, Big 12 fans, especially you Kansas State Wildcat fans.
This is Sunday at noon. We'll see if my theory of in the Big 12 only home teams win in this game, because I think West Virginia does have the potential with that defense to make a racket of things. So this is number 17 West Virginia at number 10 TCU on ESPN2. As far as I can tell, Sidonia Prince still playing for TCU despite a pretty not great Washington Post story about her
which was on the heels of, as I told you, like TikToks that I've been getting sent to me for like a month and a half now, and I'm like, Bueller?
It's if y'all want to read it, you know how to use Google, but it's not good. It's not good. I'm not really sure what TCU does about that. But anyways, as far as the game goes, I think this will be a good one.
And that is, of course, coming on the heels of West Virginia's Monday matinee victory over Kansas State, 70-57. The Big 12 equally as wide open as the Big 10. And finally, the dessert this week, Sunday, we'll call this a matinee as well at 4:00.
I have a question about the Big 12 real quick. Who gets to claim home court advantage in Kansas City? Is that Kansas State or Kansas?
I think Lawrence is I'm going to pull up maps right now because I want to confirm this. I believe that technically Lawrence is closer than Manhattan. Let me see. This is just a quick little eyeball. Yes, Manhattan. And then Lawrence has got to be closer, isn't it? Yeah, Lawrence is like 40
Okay.
minutes. Yeah. So Lawrence, yes, the Jayhawks have home court advantage in the Big 12 tournament.
The Jayhawks will win the Big 12 title then.
Yes, because the home team always wins in the Big 12, in case you missed it last week, which, by the way, I used Mitch's sound betting advice on my MyBookie midday picks on helmets and heels before I headed off for vacation last week. And we made some money. Shout out to the Wildcats, baby, of Arizona.
Yeah, cool. That's great. I'm happy.
The theory continues. I'm going to literally every time I see a Big 12 team playing another Big 12 team, which happens now nightly because we're in the middle of conference play, obviously, I am looking to see who the home team is. And I'm like, yep.
Yeah. We'll see if West Virginia can disrupt that. But yeah, as we turn our attention to the SEC, where things are equally as wide open, I feel like. This is Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Number 7 LSU at number 14 Kentucky. I was, looking at the top 16 reveal and kind of thinking about, which teams have the potential to sort of fall out of that top 16 and maybe, make a path for the others. And I feel like Kentucky is kind of right there on the edge, and they could really use a home win, a marquee home win over someone like an LSU to boost that resume and kind of lock in, their number 16 seed. I think Kentucky is a solid team this year, but a little bit like Ohio State, I just need to see it. I need to see you do it against a marquee opponent. So far, I haven't really seen that from Kentucky quite yet. But they're going to get the chance, these last couple games of the season, because they're going to play not only LSU, but also Tennessee and South Carolina.
You think LSU really could lose 2 of 3 in late February, Mitch?
Maybe.
Ooh, spicy.
Yeah. So we'll see. So Kentucky, we're about to find out a whole lot about them and kind of what they're really made of. I really like watching Georgia Amore. I think Kenny Brooks is a great coach. I just need to see it against a good team. Show me that you can beat somebody like LSU.
Shout out to Kenny especially, and Kenny's entire family. He announced after their Play for K game on Thursday that his wife, Chrissy, is cancer-free after battling cancer over the last year. So, hey, I would love to see Kentucky upset Kim Mulkey. I would love to see anyone upset Kim Mulkey. For those of you who listen to this podcast weekly, you already knew that. That is this week's Chef's Table, not making money with Mitch. So Mitch is not going to put money on the Wildcats just yet. But there are 3 other games that he has featured in this week's parlay. Who do you have coming up after a 3-0 week last time out, Mitch?
Yeah. By the way, that LSU Kentucky game, that is 4:00 on ESPN. I forgot to mention that. But yeah, we had a great week with making money with Mitch. We went 3-0 on our picks. Shout out to the Tar Heels and the Longhorns.
And the Big 12 for following
Big
some
12.
logic for us.
Yeah. Oklahoma State, doing the thing. So yeah, so we're 18-15 on the season, back in the green, which is a good thing. We start off on Thursday night, Alabama at Tennessee, 6:30 p.m. Eastern on SEC Network. Plus, I like Tennessee to win at home and cover the 7.5. I think Tennessee is on a really good roll right now, having gotten that really big win over UConn. And then, they lost to LSU, but they bounced back this week with those wins over Auburn and Ole Miss, which are 2 teams that I just think they're better than and should be beating. And they did, and they got the job done. And despite Alabama being ranked in the top 25, I just think simply Tennessee is the better team, and they're at home. I think for them to win by a couple possessions is not unrealistic.
Yeah, I'm very curious because, as you know, we did officially christen her Killa Kim on this very program last week. And so now we're all in on Tennessee in this household. And so, I'm even wearing the orange. It's WNBA, but I'm wearing the orange today. So, yes, we need the balls to keep it going. And as you noted, Mitch, it is a wide open SEC. For your second game, never say we don't love you, mid-majors, especially the Ivy League. We are big Ivy League stans on this pod, are we not?
We are, for sure. And yeah, the Ivy League has it's been one of the best mid-major leagues for several years now, I think. And I think we're heading towards a season where we're going to have a multi-bid Ivy. In Charlie Cream's bracketology right now, he has both Harvard and Princeton on the bubble. So theoretically, If one of those teams doesn't win Ivy Madness, the other team could get an at-large. If Columbia wins Ivy Madness, Columbia is right there as well, I think. Then maybe two. Do we have a 3-bid Ivy? Maybe. I don't know.
Well, I mean, are we going to have a 2-bid Big East, if that? So maybe that ends up helping in the long run?
Yeah, I think Creighton gets in, but I don't think anybody else is from the Big East. So anyway, in regards to all that, to prepare you for a multi-bid Ivy League, and this game is an important one when it comes down to that. This will be a good win and a resume booster for either side. This is Saturday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Plus. Columbia at Princeton. I like Columbia to cover 3.5. I just think both of these teams are pretty evenly matched. And Columbia is playing some good basketball lately. Princeton as well. But I really just like what Columbia is doing this year. And they have some good players. And I was trying to look up a stat, but it's escaping me.
Well, you look up that stat, Mitch, for our listeners who maybe haven't been as plugged into the Ivy League. Let me rattle off for those top 3 teams. Here are some of their non-con wins from earlier this season. Columbia went on the road and beat Providence. They defeated Florida Gulf Coast, a perennial mid-major powerhouse, if you may. Princeton, meanwhile, went on the road, got a win at DePaul, defeated Villanova at home, defeated Seton Hall on the road, got a win at Rutgers, got a win at Temple. So Rhode Island, Vermont. I mean, if you weren't sold already on those first 4 that I listed. And of course, I remember in one of our earliest podcasts, we noted Harvard, a winner at Indiana in the second week of the regular season. And so, yes, I agree, especially given the number of non-conference wins that Princeton alone has against the Big East. Those bids that normally go to the Big East because they're a Power 5 conference, please give those to the Ivy League. I'd love to see it be a multi-bid league.
Yeah. Columbia kind of has these 3 players all averaging, in double figures this year, kind of a trio of bus drivers, if you will. Kitty Henderson, Riley Weiss, and Cecilia Collins. Cecilia Collins shoots 41% from three-point land, which is super impressive. Kitty Henderson, 4.9 assists per game. I just like what Megan Griffith has going on there. They made the tournament last year as an at-large. And I think it's possible that they could get there again. Or maybe they just win Ivy Madness. And maybe we see Harvard and Harmony Turner in the tournament as an at-large. So,
all right. So we got Tennessee minus 7.5. We got Columbia plus 3.5. Who is the final game of this week's Making Money with Mitch segment?
Yeah, this is the game that I will be at this coming Sunday. Notre Dame at NC State, noon on ESPN. Reynolds Coliseum finally getting the college game day treatment, which I think is going to be a lot of fun, long overdue. And I think this is going to be a good game. But I just think that Notre Dame is really, really good and the best team in the country. And so Notre Dame is actually a road favorite in this game. And I like them to win. 3.5 points is the line. And I think Notre Dame is top to bottom the best team, not just in the ACC, but in the country. So I think they're going to squeak out a win from Reynolds Coliseum, which is not something that happens too often. I can't remember the last time that NC State lost a home game, but I believe it's been a little while.
I was going to say, is this a squeaking out a victory at that 3.5 point?
It might not be. Okay. That's why I think, I like 3.5 because, it might be that close, but, Notre Dame has also, as I mentioned earlier, their smallest margin of victory this season has been 9 points. And they just beat Duke and they beat Carolina by double digits. And I feel like they can go into NC State and comfortably win there.
The Wolfpack, of course, coming off of a disappointing 1-point loss, though. So maybe Little Murphy's Law. Not so much. I agree with you. I think the Irish will get the dub in that final game of Making Money with Mitch. Again, in case you missed it, Tennessee minus 7.5, home against Alabama Thursday. Columbia plus 3.5 at Princeton Saturday. Notre Dame minus 3.5 at NC State on Sunday. It is time for last call, shout outs, closeouts, plugs. We got to give a shout out. I feel like this is a weekly tradition, Mitch, but we got to give another shout out to our true, with all due respect to Sarah Strong, National Freshman of the Year. Mikayla Blakes does it again. She scores 30 of her 55 points in the final 6 minutes of the fourth quarter and overtime in a comeback victory over Auburn. She's absolutely ridiculous. Like I honestly, I don't know what else to say at this point. It's a 98-88 comeback overtime win. First Division I basketball player since 2000 with 55 points and 5 assists in a game. She is the first women's basketball player with 250-plus points in a game since 2015, 2016, when Wagner's Jasmine Waj, I'm going to butcher her last name, and Minnesota's Rachel Banham both did it in that same season. It defies logic. It's a player who we need to be talking about more nationally.
I don't want to put too much on Mikayla Blakes, but we talked earlier about how Juju Watkins was not the successor to Caitlin Clark.
Yep.
Is Mikayla Blakes the successor to Caitlin Clark in terms of like just a box office guard that you have to watch?
The problem is she plays at Vanderbilt. Like, honestly, like it's not a problem this year because Vanderbilt is so competitive on both the men's and the women's side. And I keep joking that it's, the court storming capital of America. And I guess court storming field storming because
it's the year of the doors.
It's the year of the doors, folks. And Mikayla Blakes is just picking up the baton where Diego Pavia left it on the football field. And the men's basketball team has done their part as well. But yes, if you haven't watched Mikayla Blakes yet, you need to. It defies any statistical measurement that we've had up to this point.
I think we're going to have a pretty tightly contested freshman of the year race. I think I wouldn't have said that in November or even December. I thought Sarah Strong was kind of running away with it. But now with Mikayla Blakes really emerging as a star of this class alongside Sarah Strong and the Toby Fourniers and Danny Carnegie's of the world, I think like it's a legitimate conversation because you can make the case, okay, well, Sarah Strong is doing this in the Big East, surrounded by All-Americans at UConn, a perennial, all-time great program. Mikayla Blakes is doing this in the SEC at Vanderbilt, not South Carolina, not LSU, Vanderbilt, coached by a former UConn player in Shea Ralph, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, I think you can really make the case. Vanderbilt is going to be a tournament team, and I'm excited to see like if they have the potential to just kind of like blow up and make the SEC tournament like super messy by upsetting a team like LSU or South Carolina or Texas once we get to Greenville. That's going to be a really compelling conference tournament.
Hey, we know she can go for 50, so there's always a chance. It's kind of weird to look at the standings and see that they're like in 7th or 8th, but I couldn't agree more, Mitch. I think that they are absolutely a team, even if they're seated in the, somewhere in the middle of the pack. They absolutely could knock off one of those higher seeded teams, not only in the SEC, but in the NCAA tournament as well.
For sure. They can be a bracket buster, yeah.
It is time for our weekly check-in, a true weekly check-in on the haters in the Little Apple. But that is because we did get some encouraging news about Ayoka Lee, maybe? Question mark?
Oh, did we? I missed this. I was in,
Yeah, you were
at a wedding.
You were
all
at the
weekend,
wedding.
so.
I was in the Keys. I just saw this. Allegedly, she may be back the 22nd. I saw. Yeah, officially will be back Saturday. Which she has like a broken leg? Question mark. But yeah, apparently that's the word on the street. Is that the expectation is that she will be back for the Sunflower Showdown on Saturday.
If I were Kansas State, I would probably not play Ayoka Lee against Kansas. I would probably not play her for the rest of the regular season. You really need her on ice and in bubble wrap until the NCAA tournament gets here. I did see in the top 16 reveal that Kansas State was in it. They've shown during this stretch that Ayoka Lee has been out that they can beat good teams. That win over TCU is the biggest proof. They did lose at Oklahoma State and at West Virginia, further playing into my theory that all Big 12 home teams win. But I think, 3 games left in the regular season. I don't know how early you want to bring them back. Again, I'm also not a doctor, so maybe they think differently than I do. I like some of Kansas State's pieces. I think Serena Sundell is one of the best guards in the country. She'll probably be like a top 5 finalist for the Lieberman Award, I feel like. But yeah, I don't know who the best team in this conference is right now. I guess it's still TCU, but I don't know. 6 different teams could win this league, and I don't think I'd be surprised.
So it's officially a fractured foot for Ayoka Lee. She's been out since January 19th, for those of you who haven't been keeping score. Jeff Mittie, the head coach, said that there is, quote, been nothing that would indicate anything differently than that she will return Saturday against Kansas. He said that she has been fine. She's running, jumping, quote, looks pretty good, which is certainly saying something considering about 2 weeks ago we thought she surely was done for the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll see. TBD.
And the haters, they will be coming for Mitch potentially.
Haven't heard from them, but I did mute and block a lot of them. So
they are our motivators. They are our motivators here on the Women's Basketball Podcast, which would not be complete without a shout out to our friends in the great state of Iowa. I just want to shout out Lucy Olsen. Speaking of someone who had the unenviable task of taking a baton from Caitlin Clark, Lucy Olsen was asked to do the impossible, which was to step into the shoes of number 22. And early on in her Hawkeye tenure as a transfer from Villanova, after being the third leading scorer in the nation behind only Caitlin and Juju Watkins last year, it looked like Lucy was going to be able to not eclipse Caitlin's marks, but certainly be more than capable of being that bus driver for the Hawkeyes and Jan Jensen in her first season as the head coach. Then there was the weird court injury where like she hurts her knee on like the weird siding of then her dad was the one who tweeted it because no one else actually knew what this knee injury was. Then there was the 5-game losing streak in the middle of January. We proclaimed on this podcast we were #not worried about Iowa. Good thing, because then they beat USC on Caitlin Clark Day. They take Ohio State to the wire Monday in overtime, a ferocious comeback by this young Hawkeye squad. Lucy Olsen at the forefront of it. And I just have to shout out Lucy because she has also been box office must-see entertainment over the last week or two. I don't know what light bulb went off or what switch was flicked. But she looks like the Lucy we saw the first month of the season and then some.
Yeah. Lucy Olsen, her past 2 wins for Iowa, 29.5 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds in those 2 victories. We considered Lucy for one of our USPWA players of the week this week, but the final spot instead went to Katie Dennebeyer of Drake, who averaged 31.5 points and 7.5 assists in 2 wins for the Bulldogs.
She's great stuff from the state of Iowa. So we're here for it.
She's been lighting it up too. I believe had 42 points in a win at Belmont this past weekend. She has the potential to really fill it up. And if I'm a high major team, and I'm going into the NCAA tournament and I'm looking at my bracket, I don't want to see Drake on the other side of it. So I'm looking forward to her and some other mid-major stars really lighting it up next month.
Having called a couple of Florida Gulf Coast games this year, and of course, having covered multiple games for both play-by-play and sidelines in the ASUN conference this year, I won't be the one breaking news. This ain't your grandmother's Florida Gulf Coast. But the Florida Gulf Coast that you're used to seeing, that perennial, hey, if you want to pick a 12 over a 4 or a 13 over a 3, whatever, that is Drake. That is Drake to a T. They are the new Florida Gulf Coast. And that's, with all due respect to what they're doing down in Fort Myers, because I do expect them to compete and to obviously win the ASUN as they have for now 12 straight seasons, even without Carl Semesco. But I do think that Drake will be the trendy mid-major pick, in addition to our friends in the Ivy League that so many circle on their brackets come March.
Yeah, I think another trendy mid-major pick is going to be James Madison, who I actually gave a slot to in my AP poll this week. They're 23-4 this season, and really no bad losses. They lost to Notre Dame and Texas and NC State, all really, really good teams, top 16 teams. And then they have a loss to Northern Arizona in overtime on a neutral court. But Northern Arizona has 20 wins this season too. Since then, the Dukes just rolling off a bunch of consecutive wins in a row. Here now, they have a really good defense. They're 5th nationally in 3-point shooting percentage allowed. Really good rebounding team as well. Got a player in Peyton McDaniel who can score and rebound with anyone. So I think the Dukes are going to be a team to be reckoned with, come March Madness. I don't know if that's like a trendy 14-2 or 13-3 kind of pick, but I think that's going to be one to watch.
I just love that you're giving love in your AP poll with one of those late 20s spots, because I do the same thing with my men's poll. And ironically, it's with a team the last 2 weeks from the Northern Virginia area, and that I've given George Mason a vote,
Oh, yeah.
the leader in the A10. And some of that is bias because of, without saying any, pointing anybody out, who I live with in my household, being from that neck of the woods and having some family ties there. But I don't have any family ties. I have no betting interest, folks. But certainly, I think it is important as an AP voter to give love to those mid-major schools, because, look, it's equally as hard, like, to go on an 11-game win streak like the George Mason Patriots men's team has been able to do in the A10, a conference that in men's basketball, if that's Dayton, everyone and their mother is talking about them. And I think the same can be said for women's basketball, for JMU to be doing what they're doing. And we're not going to talk about it because it's not Florida Gulf Coast. It's not Drake. It's not one of the Ivy League schools.
Yeah, 15 wins in a row now for James Madison's women's team. So, yeah, the Dukes have been on an impressive run. And, yeah, since you mentioned the A10, I think that's another league that could be a multi-bid league come the NCAA tournament if things kind of break the right way down the stretch. I mean, Richmond, George Mason, and St. Joe's, I think all are on their way to piecing together a resume that's going to land whoever doesn't win, the A10 tournament on the bubble, and we'll see if they're on the right side of the bubble or not. But all three of those teams playing really well this year.
We love our mid-majors. We love all things women's college basketball here on the Women's Basketball Podcast. Mitch, before we go, I know you said you will be on site, Notre Dame, NC State. Anywhere else we can find you this week?
I believe on Thursday I'm going to go to Louisville at Duke and check in on Jeff Walls and his group of kids.
Make sure you say hi to Gilbert Arenas for me if he's in attendance.
If he's there, I'll say sup to Gilbert and Zach Randolph.
And make sure you say deuces as well. He is Mitch. I am Mia saying so long. We will catch you next week.
Deuces.